Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. It's the noon hour. So I want to thank everybody for joining me today. Want to thank the chapter for allowing me to present. It's always a lot of fun. My name is Jennifer Morse. I'm a product evangelist here at MadCap Software. And today we're going to take a high-level look at the features and benefits of authoring in a topic-based environment like MadCap Flare. And so my plan was to explore some of the advantages of a topic-based authoring environment over traditional authoring. I'm hoping to showcase some of the rich single sourcing capabilities of Flare and also go through the Flare UI at a very high level. Take a look at the editing environment, take a look at some of the single sourcing techniques that we're going to talk about, build some content, and hopefully with some time show you how other technical communication teams are streamlining all of their content creation with modern, responsive HTML5 outputs and support sites all out of the box with Flare. So I don't expect anybody to be an expert by the end of the hour, but my goal is to introduce you to some concepts and some terms that hopefully you'll be able to learn more about if you decide you want to test out Flare or as you further your career. So a couple things before we get started. We have a lot to cover today. Just a couple of housekeeping tips. Switch my slides. We will be recording this webinar, so if you have to pop out early, not to worry. We're going to be sending over a link to the recording. There is a questions panel in the GoToWebinar console. Since I can't hear you, I'll ask if you have any questions at all, use that little questions area to jot them down. I'll do my best to get to what I can at the end. Hopefully you can all hear me and you can all see my screen. If you can't, go ahead and jot a little note in that questions panel and we'll try to help you out so that you can hear us okay. So hopefully just quick technology check. If you want to let me know that you can hear and see me okay, maybe a little quick thumbs up in the questions panel, that would be great since I can't hear you well. So we'll go ahead and get started then. And it looks like you can. Perfect. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. All right. So let me advance my slides. There we go. So if there's a few core reasons why teams consider using MadCap Flare for their documentation and why people consider using Flare in general. The first one is content reuse. So, a lot of authors have the same content, they have the same help product, they have the same procedure and lots of different manuals, and authors are really tired of updating the same content, that similar content across all of the different manuals when there's a change. So that's a big thing that we address. The next thing is multi-channel publishing, or the ability to publish to multiple outputs. Maybe if you think about all the manuals that you're producing now, not such a big deal if you only have to deliver them as PDF files, but maybe you have to shift gears. Maybe you have to have that content delivered as a manual that's more searchable and navigable online. Maybe it has to be viewed on a mobile device, so we have to be mindful of how that content responds and looks on a smaller screen size. So that's the other problem that we solve. All of the content that you write in Flare can be published to all of the different channels that you need to support. Another big benefit is improved self-service. Searchable and findable documentation means users can be empowered to find what they need themselves. You can reduce the amount of support calls that come in. A lot of the low-lying stuff, the low-hanging fruit can be handled by really good documentation. And people can find the answers when they need it. And when we do this kind of thing, well, then you've got some back-end benefits too. You can start gathering data. You can start understanding, well, how is my content being viewed? What are people searching on? Are they searching on things that they're not finding? So all of that starts to come into play when we offer better self-service. And then the last thing is flexibility and ease of use. So if we combine all the multi-channel publishing benefits and all the content reuse functionality, the other thing we're trying to help solve in the industry is we don't want authors to necessarily need to be XML programmers in order to achieve all of this functionality. So those are the things that we're really trying to bring to the table here. Now, in terms of the breadth of industries and companies that we're in, I throw this up here just as a really high level. This is a very small sampling. We're in so many different verticals and so many different companies, and even though these are really large names, the tool scales wonderfully. Flare authors come in all shapes and sizes. So we work with teams that are very small, maybe a team of 1 or 2, all the way up to teams that are, standardized north of 300 authors. So the tool does scale really, really well. Now, in terms of that very first content reuse bullet that I mentioned in that previous slide, I want to do a quick comparison with something very familiar to you all, hopefully, which is Microsoft Word. And I'm going to use that as an example and how it's kind of different from Flare and some of its limitations. So the challenge with Microsoft Word is that the things that make it so easy for us to use are some of the things that get in the way of content reuse. And that's because when you're working in Microsoft Word, you're actually doing three things at once. It's not something that you probably think about because for most of us, it's become second nature. But what's happening is you're writing all of your content. You're also, the second thing you're doing, you're embedding all of the formatting. What do my font looks like? What do my heading styles look like? And the last thing that you're doing is you're defining the overall scope of the document. And what do I mean by scope? Well, if you're writing a training manual for a particular audience, it's always going to be a training manual for that audience. If you're writing an installation guide for product A, it's always going to be an installation guide for product A. So essentially what that document is gets baked right into it. And as a result, we really don't have a great content reuse model. The typical thing we have to do in Word is if you need a derivative document or a derivative version of that original document that you wrote. Like in my example here, I've got this original draft user guide here. Maybe you author it, you send it around to the team, and everybody says, hey, that's great. I need you to make a version of this for my standard customers, and we also need a version of it for the enterprise customers. I need you to change it a little bit. All right, no problem. So what do? We have to do a save as. And now we've got 2 copies of that original draft because we need to change it up a little bit. There may be a lot of overlap in the content that's here. There's going to be some differences though. Maybe you can deal with 2. You know, again, if any of the common content changes between these 2 guys, we have to remember to go into both of them and change them. And maybe 2's not such a big deal, but what happens if you have to go through this exercise more than once? What if your deliverables start changing? Maybe you need one for company A, maybe you need one for company B, you know, enterprise company. So these, I'm stopping at an additional 4 save as here, but I think in the real world, this happens a lot, and you end up with a lot of derivatives of that original document. And you get to a point where you actually have to keep a spreadsheet of what you changed and where in order to keep track of things downstream that you have to manage. And that can lead to a big giant mess. And if you distill down to what's going on, as long as we're over here on the right-hand side of the screen, what we're doing is we're hand touching and hand editing our end deliverables. And that's what sticks us in a very inefficient workflow. And the whole idea of MadCap Flare and really content management in general, just take the tool out of it for a second. We want to stay over here on the left-hand side of the screen. And we only want to manage a single source of material. So we want to be in a place where you might have procedure X that lives in a bunch of PDF files, maybe some Word docs, and an online knowledge base over here on the side. But when it comes time to make a change to procedure X, I only want to have to do it in one place. I don't want to go into all the places where it lives. I should only have to update it once. So how do we do this? Well, those 3 components that I spoke about in Word, how we're doing those 3 things at once, we're writing the content, we're embedding our formatting, and we're defining the scope. When we're working in Flare, we break those into separate components. I'm going to start with the authoring piece because there are a few things that we do a little bit differently in a content management world. First, when we're working in Word, we call it linear-based authoring, right? You start at the beginning of that document and you essentially keep going until you get to the end. Flare doesn't work that way. We follow what's known as topic-based authoring. So we work on much more granular content, which we call topics. So if you think of that long policy and procedure manual or that long user guide that you've got or that long training guide that you've written, whatever it is, maybe it's got 6 chapters in it. Well, that has 6 granularity points built right in. That's good. If we just look at chapter 3, for example, maybe we take a look and chapter 3 has 2 procedures and 2 reference sections, and that's another level of granularity. And that's what we're going to do with Flare. We're going to take those 2 procedures and those 2 reference sections that make up the entirety of chapter 3, and we're going to break those out as standalone files. Now, there isn't really a rule out there that says, well, a topic, you know, it can only be this long or this short, you know, X number of words. It's not so much the size of the topic, but a topic should have it should be about a specific subject. It should have an identifiable purpose, and it should be able to stand on its own. It shouldn't need a lot of other stuff and content to make sense. So in my example here, I've got this pool of topics, okay, on my screen. If I want to make a PDF procedure manual that just includes a few of these guys that are up here, maybe these ones highlighted in green, well, then I can grab those topics, I can stick them together like little Lego bricks and produce a PDF document. But at the same time, maybe I need to create a searchable and navigable online knowledge base or an online doc center or something with just these topics highlighted. Well, then I can grab those together, stitch them together in whatever little order that I want, publish them as an online output, maybe on the intranet or an internal web server or some sort of publicly facing site. So by modularizing our content like this, we're not adding any extra work. We're just adding a lot more flexibility on how we can reuse these bits in the future. And oftentimes making this change from a linear development environment to a topic-based environment like this, it solves a lot of problems for a lot of people. But sometimes we have to go to the next level. Maybe this topic here about users, maybe that can't be used for everybody that's going to see that bit of content. Maybe it needs to be modified or customized slightly for a certain audience. Well, in Word, we'd have to do a save as, right? We'd have to make a copy of that and edit it for this new audience. And that just puts us back into that inefficient workflow of hand touching and hand editing our end deliverables. So in Flare, we're going to take care of that problem with what we call single source publishing. So it's a term you've probably heard of, but in plain English, basically it's if I've got a version of my content for audience A and a special version of that content for audience B and an entirely different variation for audience C, I'm not going to have 3 different versions of that source material to maintain. I'm going to put my content into one bit of content. I'm going to let my software do the heavy lifting. And why is this a good thing? Well, it's really best practice when we're maintaining content for multiple deliverables, multiple audiences, multiple outputs. We can be much more productive as authors because we reduce so much of the content duplication that goes on when we're working in a traditional authoring environment. So we can be much more consistent in our messaging. You know, we're saying things the same way every time. You know, if you've got multiple manuals that are really similar and you need to change the common content that lives in all of those manuals, you sometimes increase your chances of error. So doing it this way really reduces that. We can get our content out the door much faster because stuff is already written. We can reuse it. If you're crossing the localization bridge, if you have a need to translate any of this content into other languages, having a single source of content really sets you up to save a lot of money on the translation side of things as well. So it's just an overall good idea. So what it ends up looking like, and this is a little bit of a simulation, is I would have my procedure with all of my content. So here's my mock procedure here, getting started. The next thing I'm going to do in Flare is I'm going to add some single sourcing magic. I'm going to add things like conditional tags and variables to customize my source material. So as an example, maybe this opening paragraph here at the top of this document, this opening paragraph, maybe it's unique for audience A. So in Flare, I'm going to use a special color code which says, hey, this content is special. This only applies to audience A. So maybe my beginner audience. So I've marked it in this red. Maybe the second paragraph here, well, this is an alternate opening paragraph. This time it's unique to audience B. So it gets a different color code to let me know that it's special. Maybe audience B is my intermediate audience. Okay, so the next few paragraphs there, maybe those are the same. I'm going to leave those guys alone. And maybe this very last paragraph down here, well, maybe that's content I only want to show up if we produce a PDF manual. Maybe these first two up here, these are going to either be viewed on a mobile device or in a browser. But this last paragraph, I only want this to show up in a PDF output for my beginner audience. So if content is unique for any reason at all, you can use one of these color markers, which we call conditional tags in Flare, to identify it. So it's great for the writer, but we can't give it to our customer looking like this. So Flare is going to help us generate all of these custom deliverables. Now in an XML workflow, these are called transforms, which is a fancy word for take my raw, neutral XML content, because that's all your Flare topics are. They're not help specific, they're not print specific, they're nothing until we do something with them. And so there's all these complicated, XML alphabet soup terms out there like XSLT and XSLFO transforms. But in all honesty, most folks don't care about all of that XML alphabet soup. They just want it to work and they want it to look good. So we simplified that whole transform terminology and we call these transforms publishing targets. And a publishing target in Flare is just a recipe that tells Flare how to process these raw neutral files so that the deliverable is exactly what we want for the right audience. So I may have one here, I may have a recipe for my beginner audience, so I'm going to tell that target file, include those beginner tags, get rid of anything I've tagged as intermediate and PDF. I don't want it in there. I may have another one for my intermediate audience. Of course, I'm going to include anything I've tagged as intermediate, and then I can exclude anything I've marked as beginner or PDF, since I don't want that in there. And then, of course, for my PDF manual, I want that to be just inclusive of the PDF content and the beginner information. So I'm going to exclude anything I've tagged as intermediate. And then from there, you know, once the content is authored, you know, if we need a new output or a new deliverable, well, then I can just make a new publishing target. I can turn some dials and produce a new document that's exactly what I need. I don't have to save a version of this and duplicate my efforts. And then, so from there, I can generate my outputs. I have my output for my beginner audience here with my red content. My beginner audience just has the blue, maybe looks a little bit different. And then, of course, my standard PDF, just the red and the PDF content. Of course, the common bits are staying in here across them all. Now, I do want to point out, those color codes, they don't stay here in our output. I'm just showing that for the continuity of content here. They only show up in our source files over here on the left. All right, so those are some of the big picture concepts. In terms of the real world workflow, it's often, we see it in 3 steps. The first thing we want to give people the ability to do is we want to give you the ability to import existing information. So I won't go through every here, but the biggies are going to be, importing a body of Microsoft Word docs. We have a really neat ability to import Microsoft Excel tables and convert them to beautiful looking tables in Flare. And what's fun about that is oftentimes with Excel, you may not be the person who's maintaining all of that data. So with our Excel import, we can link that back to the source file. So if that source file changes, if somebody in accounting updates it, when we rebuild our content, Flare's going to suck in all of those changes and fill it in for us. We don't have to manually manage that, which is really nice. We can bring in Adobe FrameMaker files and RoboHelp projects. And on the RoboHelp side, we can bring in MPJs and XPJs and convert them to Flare. We can bring in author it projects, HTML files, Doc2Help, Chum, and of course, DITA maps as well. All right, so that's enough on the PowerPoint. So, oh, excuse me, not quite done. The next thing we're going to do is once everything is imported, well, then we can edit some of that information that comes in. And we also have the ability to create net new topics right within the Flare editor, which we'll talk about in just a second. Once everything's edited and styled the way we want, well, then we can start getting into those publishing targets and those recipes, and we can produce a number of outputs. Again, probably the most popular is direct to PDF and the responsive HTML5 for the web browser. All right, now I'm going to put PowerPoint away, and I'm going to go right into Flare. So I'm pulling up Flare here. I don't know if any of you have had a chance to download the trial or tinker with it at all. But when you first open up Flare, you come to this home screen here. A lot of folks will jump right in and they'll get lost in this thing and just dive right in, and that's fine. But I do want to draw your attention to a few areas that may be helpful if you decide to test this out or try it in your own environment. The first thing here is we do give you access to a getting started guide, which is really handy if you're more of a reader of things. If you're more of a visual learner, we give you access to a number of videos. They're short little tutorials that simulate using Flare, and they walk you through various things. But one of the most helpful things is this getting started tutorial. This is going to walk you through an unfinished Flare project, and kind of a good place to begin is with this tutorial. So how do we start a project? How do we add content? How do we add images and conditions, and how do we actually build something? So I highly recommend starting with this. We eat our own dog food around here, so we used Flare and actually our own tool Mimic to create all these things. So it's a nice way to see what you can do with it in terms of real world stuff. We also give you access to a number of different project templates. We have about 20 or so project different templates here to start. I think I'm using this one for the demo today. And we also give you access. We have a number of more modern templates as well that we've been adding to our website. These are free to download. You can see a preview of them. I think we've got about 6 up there right now. And the whole point of these templates is just to get you started. They're not the be all end all. They may not be your perfect vision in terms of look and feel, but our goal is to kind of get you a lot of the way there so that you can tweak these things to meet your own corporate branding needs. But just some placeholder stuff, and you can change anything. On the left-hand side, now I've got this project loaded. Again, I started it from this template. On the left-hand side, you see something called the Content Explorer. We also have the Project Organizer. These are the 2 areas where I'm going to be spending the most time. The Content Explorer stores all of our topics, all of those little Lego bricks that I mentioned, they're all stored here. You can organize your topics any way you want. You can create additional folders and organize them, but this is basically like a file list of all of your content. The other thing that gets stored here, every project gets a resources folder. So things that live in here are things like your images, your multimedia files, things that you're going to be using that support your topics, or content that's going to support your topics. Also your style sheets, which we'll talk a little bit about. Style sheets controlling the look and feel of everything gets stored here as well. And the project organizer is going to be more of the gearing. So those targets or those recipe files I mentioned are there. Our skins and our web wrappers that wrap around our HTML5 content are there. And we'll come back to this in a minute. But let's start over here in the Content Explorer. If I want to start working in a file, editing a topic, I just double click on it. And it's going to open up in our XML editor over here on the right. Now we call it an XML editor, but we don't want you to feel like you have to know how to spell XML in order to use this successfully. We wanted to model this after, make it feel as word processory as possible so that you can use it quickly. So just like in Word, I can add content here. I'll start typing some words that we're going to talk about. Conditions. If I wanted to, maybe I wanted to, make a numbered list. I can select my content. Just like in Word, I can come up here. I can make a bullet or a numbered list if I want. So pretty easy to do. If we want to work with images, there's a few different ways we can work with screenshots. Many folks augment the written word with pictures of UI or pictured steps and things. Really easy to do. If you happen to have an image in your project that you want to use, again, they're stored in this resources folder, in their own images folder. Now this is a template project, so it came with a lot of files. But if I click on one, I get a little bit of a preview of what it is, so I know. I can always click and drag over my image. Really easy to manipulate. If you don't have an image in your project that you want to use, you just need to insert it. I'm a big fan of the right-click menu in Flare because I can often do 90% of what I want to do. So if I right-click, I do get an insert option, and I can insert an image. I can browse out to some location on the network that I have access to and bring in an image file from somebody else. Multimedia as well. We can insert all kinds of multimedia file types. So I'll show you the list here. If you've got Windows media files, Flash movies, QuickTime movies, HTML5 movies, you can bring all of those compiled movies in. We can also bring in files from the web. So if we want to insert a YouTube video, all you need is the web address, and you can bring it in and embed it in your topic. And we can always resize these things, make it look however you want. So pretty straightforward to work with. Now, those are some of the basic editing features, but there are some things that give us a little bit more power, of course, that make it easy for us to achieve that single sourcing workflow and ensure we're reusing as much information as we can. So as authors, we can use elements like, and I mentioned this in the slides earlier, we can use variables and snippets and those color-coded conditional markers that I touched on to customize our source. So let's talk a little bit about variables because these are really fun, really important. If we take a look at this very first line here, it says, here are the basic steps for using FictionSoft. Now, FictionSoft is grayed out. If I wanted to edit this word, I can't. I can't actually click in here and edit this text. Flare actually tells me that this is a variable, so I kind of know why that's special. What is a variable in Flare? Well, it's just a placeholder for text or a short string of information. And the benefit to using a variable is that you've got a single place to define what that text is, and we can define what that is project-wide. And we can redefine them if need be, whenever we need to. So great for product names, version numbers, company names, any short string of text that you think is going to change in the future and you're not sure what it's going to be, consider using a variable. And what's nice about Flare is if you're typing, so if I said more about FictionSoft, you can see it starts to detect that I'm typing this reusable bit, and it'll ask me, hey, do you want to go ahead and use one of these variables? And I'll say yes. So you don't have to turn that on. Some people may find that distracting. That's an option you can turn off, but I like it. It kind of keeps me honest, particularly for these little text variables, because it ensures that I'm using it. Now, let's say at the 11th hour, okay, so I've only used this variable twice, but let's say at the 11th hour, marketing comes to you and says, all right, doc team, we're not calling our product FictionSoft anymore. We're changing the name. We're calling it FictionSoft Enterprise. We're shipping tomorrow, so I need you to update all of the documentation to reflect the new name change. Well, if you were just typing in FictionSoft as regular text, you'd be hunting and pecking to find that text FictionSoft everywhere and updating it, or perhaps doing a multi-file find and replace, which can be a little bit scary. You want to make sure you didn't miss anything. It can be a little bit error prone. But since we used a variable, we can just redefine what that is, and it's going to update it across the whole project for me. And the easiest way that I found to do that is just to right click, and it says open my variable set. And I like this personally because it takes me right to where I need to go. This takes me right to my variable list. There's that product name. It happens that our FictionSoft is the name of our company too. So if we double click on this here, marketing says we got to call it Enterprise, FictionSoft Enterprise. Let's see if I can type properly. And when I save this file, everywhere I've used that variable, it's going to update for me. I don't have to manually do it. So this can save a lot of time for those little short strings of text. What if you've got a much larger chunk of content that you need to use over and over again? Maybe you've got a series of steps or styled admonitions that you use often. Maybe it's a phrase or a paragraph that you use often, or just a copyright statement that's in a few different places. For these larger chunks of content, we can use what we call a snippet. Now, snippets are reusable chunks, like I mentioned. They are inserted into our topic by reference, just like a variable here. This is not hard-coded. This is inserted by reference. But snippets can be styled. They can contain images. They can contain tables. They can contain really anything you'd include in an entire topic, but I like to think of them like subtopics. And I'll show you what I mean. So if I open up another topic here, by the way, this is a multi-document interface. So as I start opening things, they're just going to open and make themselves available to me in these tabs. Maybe this information here, these 3 steps, maybe this is stuff that I'm going to be using a lot. I don't want to have to come to this getting started topic and constantly copy and paste it, which you can do. It's time consuming. And I certainly don't want to retype it. So what I can do is I can make it a snippet. So I'll select my text that I want to become a snippet. There's a little button up here. It's also available in the right-click menu, but this is kind of front and center. I'll create my snippet. I'll give it a name. So you'll want to call it something. By default, it'll put it in this resources folder, which is over here on the left, so you can get quick access to it, and I'll click create. Now, my content didn't change at all. You'll notice, nothing looks different, but I can't actually click in here and edit this content. That's because this whole chunk now is somewhere else. It's coming from this snippet that we just created, and we've inserted it by reference. So if I need to use this guy again, maybe I need to drop that chunk of content right here. I can click and drag him over, and he shows up. So it's really easy to use this as chunked content that you need to insert in lots of different places. Now, again, the beauty of this is if you send this out and they say, guys, this 3rd feature here, we're not shipping that. We're tabling it for the next release. Get it out of the docs. I don't have to go into all the places where I listed this feature list or listed that feature. I can just update my snippet in one place. So if I double click on my snippet, now I can edit it in the editor like I would any other topic. So I can come in here. If they say number 3's got to go, when I delete and save that file, everywhere I've used that snippet, it's going to update for me. I don't have to manually manage that. I just manage it here in the snippet file. So really, really powerful, really, really fun. It can save you quite a bit of time. Now, once you get comfortable with the basic editor here, I want to just draw your attention to a few things that may look different than Microsoft Word. One of the things you'll notice here that's living on the left-hand side are these tag bars. What we call these our XML structure bars. This is actually technology that we've patented, so we're kind of proud of it. But this is a way to see the underlying XML structure of this topic. If you look at a lot of powerful XML editors out there, sometimes you get something that looks a little bit like this. And that can be really daunting for people. Not everybody's comfortable working in this kind of environment. We have plenty of folks that do, and we're not going to judge. But for a lot of folks, more of a visual editing environment, more of a what you see is what you get kind of environment is a little bit more comfortable. So these structure bars give us a nice happy medium, and they tell us what's happening under the hood structurally without contaminating our writing environment with a bunch of scary looking tags. So here I can see I've got an H1, I've got a paragraph here, I've got an ordered list with 3 list items. Here's that snippet block. If we hover over it, it tells us. So it can be really handy. We can also use these structure bars to manipulate content. And this is really tricky to do. I don't know if you've ever done this in Word. Maybe you've got a complex numbered list and you need to move some of those list items around. In Word, it's a select, cut, hope you caught all the returns, paste it somewhere else. Did we mess up our numbering? We're fixing our style sheet in Word. So there's a lot that you got to do. In Flare, we can move these things structurally. So if I decide that step number 3 is in the wrong position, Well, then I can click and drag, and you should see that little arrow that shows up that tells me that it's legally valid to drop my item here, and I did. So number 3 just became step number 2, and all of my numbering self-healed. So we talked a little bit about those condition tags. I want to touch on those too. We can also use these structure bars to apply those conditional markers. So if we decide step number 2 is sensitive information, maybe this basic steps topic, it has to be customized slightly. It may end up in 2 different outputs, and one of those outputs can't have step number 2 in there. Well, what I can do is I can right click on my item and I can pull up my conditional markers. Now, this is a template project, so it only gave me 4 markers to work with. But when you're working and testing and tinkering, you can create any number of conditional tags you want. You can call them whatever you want. You can give them whatever color you want. But I'm just going to use what's given to me here. Maybe this is only for PDF. I don't want it to show up at all when I go online, so I'm going to give it that PDF only tag. Maybe this image here, or maybe this whole object. Maybe I want him to be only online. I don't want it to show up in PDF for whatever reason. So we can mark our content up however we want. Maybe this word basic steps, maybe that's also sensitive information. Only want it to show up on PDF. I don't want it to show up online. So we can conditionalize down to the character level here. We can remove entire elements. We can remove words, punctuation marks. We can apply a conditional tag onto an entire folder if we want to. And we can say, this only applies to this, or it doesn't apply to that. So we can get really, really granular with these tags. Sometimes when we're marking up our source material like this, it's really challenging to know, well, how is all of this going to look? And in Flare, we do give you the ability to preview your topics, and you don't have to compile your entire output in order to see, well, how is this going to look online? How is it going to look in PDF? We can actually preview it. So there's a little button up here, and this is going to let us preview this topic and all of the different target outputs that we've got. Now, because it's a template project, it came with 4, and it's going to respect those conditional tags that we applied. So if I want to take a look and see, well, how is this going to look in a browser, I can open this guy up, and we can expand him out here and we can take a look. This preview window, it's pretty flexible because you may be working in a dual monitor situation. You can click and drag him over and keep him open on the other monitor if you want. You can dock him over here on the right-hand side. Hopefully that comes through in the GoToMeeting, but let's compare here. So here's my source topic. Here's what it's going to look like in the browser. You can see the word basic is gone because we told it not to include those PDF tags. We can see that step number 2 is gone, okay? So my numbering didn't mess up, everything's self-healing, and everything else is there. We can also toggle and see, well, how is this going to look in PDF? So we can see how this is going to look. It's going to look a little bit different since we have different styling properties in our PDF file, which I'll talk about in a second. But here all of my stuff is turned on because we told that PDF target to keep all of those PDF specific things in there. And we can see we have all of the lists here. But my video is gone because I told it to be removed for PDF. So really kind of nice to see how these things are going to look, spot check. But for real estate purposes, I'm going to put this away. This is dynamic, by the way. If I start, adding more content, I can keep my preview open. As long as once I save that topic file, it's going to update for me and it's going to show me here. I don't have to close my preview window down, make my edits, and then re-invoke it. I can keep it open if I want because it's going to dynamically update. So I'll put him away. Let's see, just checking my time. I do want to spend a little bit of time. I don't know, I'm hoping some of you may be interested in this. I should have maybe polled in the beginning. I thought it may be handy to show how Flare brings in Word documents really quick, because that's kind of a real world thing. If you guys want to use the chat window there, just maybe give me the high sign if that's something that's interesting to you. Otherwise, we can skip ahead. But oftentimes people come from a Microsoft Word environment, and I get that question a lot. How do we import our existing files? So I'll just run through it really quick so you can kind of get an idea. So when you start a brand new Flare project, you can start it from a collection of Word docs, or if you've got a project already going, you can bring Word docs in and just import them in and start working with those files. And so since I've already got a project brewing here, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So open my project tab. I have the opportunity to import, and I can bring in a number of different files, but I'm going to start that Microsoft Word import wizard. And I'll bring him up. And I think there's a little bit of a lag with GoTo, so I'm going to wait for your screens to catch up. Okay, so we're going to bring this into this project. And now this is where we tell Flare what files we want to bring in. So we just want to add those Word files in. So I'm going to click this little plus button, and I'm going to browse out to some files. And I've got some that I can bring in. In fact, I'm going to bring in a handful of them. I'm choosing these 4 on purpose because this is like worst case scenario. 3 of these, and if you're coming from Word or FrameMaker or whatever, you're going to know a little bit about your files. But I'm doing this on purpose because I know that 3 of these docs came from one department. They're following their own Word template and everything's great. One of these documents is coming from the engineering team. And so they are using their own crazy Word template. Maybe they renamed some of those styles. And again, that often happens. So I'm kind of going worst case. So I'm going to choose these 4 documents to bring in, and they'll list them here. I'm going to click next. What's Flare's going to do? It's going to do a deep scan of these documents. It wants to reuse as much information as it can. We want lists to stay lists. We want tables to stay tables. And we come to our first big decision point here. And this is where we tell Flare, how are we going to break up those long linear docs into individual topics so we're not copying and pasting anything? And the way we do that is using Word styles. So my advice to folks coming from Word is, make sure that Word doc is pretty well formed. Make sure you're not using inline formatting to style stuff, because you're going to have a much better go of getting it into this content management tool if you're using Word styles. So here we're looking at some styles that it found. So it found heading 1. That's a great place to start. If we add it to the new topic styles list, Flare's going to look at those docs. Every time it comes to heading 1, it's going to break and create a new topic for me. And now I'm going to click finish, and we get a little bit of a preview. And so anytime we see a .htm, that's a topic file. And I can look at these here, and while it looks pretty good, my content looks good, my image looks good, as I'm scrolling here, this is kind of looking, here this looks like a subheading right here. There's another subheading. This is kind of looking like a small chapter to me rather than an individual topic. So if you don't like what you see, you can always cancel and perhaps come back here and get a little bit more granular. So maybe I need a break on heading 2 as well. But we also don't want to forget about that engineering department. Here we notice heading 1 and heading 2. Well, they just kind of renamed their styles. Maybe they look a little bit different. We don't want to forget about those. So we want to add those to the list as well. So now when we click finish, hopefully we see a few more bits, and we do. So here's that same topic that we were just previewing, but as you can see, it stops right after this image. So that was in fact a subheading. And these are looking about right. This is looking better to me. These are looking like small chunks of information that we can reuse. So I'll click accept. Now what Flare did over here on the left is it created a folder and dumped all of those new little Lego bricks in there for me to use. And I can move these guys around. I can put them in whatever folder that I want. And this actually brings me to the next point, which was, when I first started using Flare, it was kind of a confusing concept to me. I'd look at these files and I'd say, okay, great, but maybe what's new, I want that to be first in my list. I don't want it to be down here. And every time I move stuff around, it always dropped itself alphanumerically. And that's because that's exactly what this Content Explorer is designed to do. This is just a file list to keep you organized. But the topics that we deliver in an output and their actual order is not maintained here. It's maintained in our project organizer in our table of contents file. So I'm just going to switch gears for a minute. I'm going to come down to the project organizer, and we've got this TOCs folder here. TOC stands for Table of Contents, and it plays a really important role. Your TOC controls the order and the topics that are delivered in your output. It's the TOC that lets you stitch together whatever topics you want for a given deliverable. So it's not uncommon to have multiple tables of contents in a project. You may have different outputs that need different orders of things, and that's okay. If we take a look at one of these, online output, I'll open him up. So this should look familiar. This looks like a standard table of contents you'd find in a help file or a book or whatever. And this is where we can start moving things around. Maybe what's new needs to be first. I can click and drag him wherever I want to go, or I can use these little guys up here in the toolbar if I want. Maybe there's a topic that I need to bring in here that's not in this TOC. Maybe one of those topics that came in from the import. If I switch over to my Content Explorer, maybe this About Firewalls topic, maybe he needs to go right here. So we can organize these files however we want in whatever order we want. And by the way, these are blue. These are actually linked. These are like system variables. These are placeholders that kind of related to those variables that we talked about. They're linked to the topic title. And what's nice about that is if you change the name of your topic title or that heading, your TOC is going to update for you automatically. You don't have to update them in 2 places. So it's kind of this nice self-healing effect if you change the topic title. All right, so we've built our table of contents here. We've ordered some things around. Let's tie some of these concepts together. what we want to do now is we want to start talking about that publishing process. So back in our project organizer, I want to bring up these targets here. So again, template project, these targets, these are our outputs, these are our recipe files. And the template project came with a few already. And you can add additional targets if you want. It's just right click and add target. It's pretty straightforward. But let's play with one of these and edit it and see what we get. So I'm going to double click on this HTML5 target and we'll take a look. Now I'm not going to go through all of these options today, but I just want to go through some of the biggies. The first thing is for this recipe file, what am I going to make? Well, in this case, we've got HTML5 selected, but as you can see, we can build a lot of different options. The table of contents, this is where we tell that target file, okay, well, what order of topics do we want to include? So this will give us all of the TOCs that we were just working on. We were just editing this online output one, so let's use that. The other thing I want to mention is conditional text. This is where we tell the target, okay, of those color-coded markers, what do we want to include or exclude here? I do want to touch quickly on variables. Remember, we changed that product name variable for FictionSoft to FictionSoft Enterprise. What you can do here is you can actually override that variable definition at the target level. Maybe for this particular HTML5 site, it needs to say something completely different for whatever reason. Maybe for a different customer. Maybe this needs to say Flare for some reason. We can overwrite that variable definition at the target file. It's not going to affect the rest of my source or the rest of my outputs, just this particular output. So we can make that override. And that's it. I'm going to go ahead and click build. Now this is running in the background. I can do other things. I can continue to work. I can build this PDF if I want to at the same time. You don't have to get up and get a cup of coffee and wait for these processes to be done. You can continue working. It's not a problem. But it compiles pretty quickly. So let's take a look at what we got. I'll take a look. Oh, it opened in my other monitor. Let me bring him over here. So what we're looking at here is our bone stock, out of the box, no customizations at all, responsive HTML5 output. We call it top navigation. We call it top navigation because we took the table of contents that lives down the left usually, and we moved it across the top and made our table of contents show up here. So it looks more modern, it looks more like a website. Now, everything you see here can be customized. We have an entire skin editor, which I didn't have time to get into today, but you can customize these things to your heart's delight. You're really limited by your own imagination, changing your logo, your background color, the size of your header. You know, do you want your header to be sticky so as you scroll, you keep it in view there? You don't like rounded corners, maybe you like square and get rid of this black thing. All of this stuff can be customized. This is just a template that we gave you out of the box. You can change these guys if you want to. We give you links to PDF files, little placeholders, and in this particular project template, little placeholders for embedded movies too. It is responsive. So if I shrink this guy down, you'll notice my content will change a little bit. Let me make this kind of like a tablet or a mobile device here. You'll see how we get some responsiveness. My font changed a little bit, and I also get this hamburger menu. That TOC is gone, and I can click here and actually tap through the topics that I want. So if I was holding this, you know, in my hand or on a tablet, I have this little guy here I can use to navigate through. You'll also notice that not only does my skin respond, but my content on the page responds as well. So, you know, this is really important. It's not just the skin that you have to be mindful of. The content on this page should respond as well. So you can see that these movies that were once kind of stacked across the side there, now they're stacked on top of each other if we were looking at this on a smaller screen size. We wanted to make search very prominent. What do users do when they get stuck? They go to Google and they search. So in this particular example, we wanted search to be really front and center, really easy to see. I can type on a word, and I get these googly style results as well. I get a little bit of a preview of the topic, a little bit of a description. I can go right to it. And one thing that I love, and I think this really increases the usability of your content, didn't have time to show this, but one of the things you can do in Flare is you can build a glossary. And so if you're documenting technical terms or special terms, I think a glossary is a great thing to have. Because in top nav, we don't have tabs like we have in the older TriPaint or the older RoboHelp outputs where you've got little tabs over here on the side. So what this does is if your end user searches on a term that's defined in your glossary, it's going to be the very first thing they see at the top. It's kind of like when you do a search in Google for a word and Google just kind of knows that's what you were looking for and it shows you the definition at the very top of the list. We're trying to mimic that same kind of thing. And so I think it really increases the usability of your content if you're defining technical terms to make it available like this. So kind of googly style results. Here's the table of contents we can navigate through. And again, all these buttons, the look and feel, it's all customizable. In fact, I brought up some other examples here because I wanted to show you what you can do. Here is a company called Bizarre Voice. So they took that project template that we were just looking at, and they customized it to their own corporate look and needs. So this was all done right out of the box with Flare. So their own colors and logos and things, you know, their own product tiles that they designed, their own footer information down here. So this was all done right out of the Flare box. And they've done some really neat things with their style sheet. They've customized, you know, their look and feel a little bit. I think it looks really nice. Obviously, they changed the text in here, which you can easily do. Here's another one. Here's another different look and feel. Again, all done out of the box. A company called Tableau. They use our software for all of their documentation. So as you can see, it looks really different. Here's their table of contents up here. We can navigate through these things. You can see it looks a little bit different. But this little side menu here sticks to the page, which is kind of cool. So really, beauty is in the eye of the beholder when it comes to look and feel. And what's great about Flare is we separate out content from structure. So you can change directions really quickly. You can change the look and feel of your information just by making little tweaks to your CSS file, your cascading style sheet file. So it's really easy to do. Just to kind of show you, here's a PDF that was authored and published out of Flare. And we can produce amazing looking PDFs with custom headers and footers, custom pagination. You know, we don't have to go to some interchange format. We don't have to output to Word and post-process before we get these beautiful looking PDFs. So this company designed their own layouts so that they match their corporate branding needs. Table of contents is dynamically built. We can see our pagination changes once we get to the real stuff. So really easy to do. Really, you know, really depends on your own, you know, imagination and what you want to create, but it's all available to you. One thing I didn't mention, and let me pull up the PDF that we made. This is the PDF of my of the files we were just looking at. Let me change displays here. Let me do a single page, and let me increase this a little bit so we can see. So dynamically built table of contents here. So here's here's that image that we inserted. I want to talk a little bit about links quickly and just show you. One thing we do support are cross-references. So if we're looking at this here, you know, it says, you know, for more information, see images on page 19. When you're working in Flare, if you're referencing your reader to some other topic or a bookmark in a topic, we can use what are called cross-references rather than standard hyperlinks. The reason being is a standard hyperlink is this sort of blue underline thing. If you were actually printing this page out, or you were sending your manual off to a, you know, an offset printer somewhere to get it actually bound, a blue underline term doesn't do anybody any good when we're holding it in our hand. So cross-references are great because they act as regular hyperlinks when we're looking at content online. In fact, if we were looking at this in the browser, we can go check it out, it would actually say see images, and images would look like a blue underline term. But the beauty of these cross-references is they self-heal to proper page cross-references when we go to print. So if we are looking at the PDF online, it's still going to act like a real hyperlink. But if we were holding the page in our hand, this would dynamically generate to show you what page to refer to. So cross-references are really powerful and really helpful in Flare. All right, so I've done a lot of talking. I'd encourage you, if you have any questions at all, use that questions panel. I see a few coming in, or one or two coming in that I'll get to in just a minute. I do want to just bring everybody's attention. Let me go back to PowerPoint here. Before we get to questions, just a couple of things. I want to remind everybody on this presentation, if you have any interest at all in taking some of your skills to the next level, we have a few fun training classes coming up. We have one in the middle, or two in the middle of May. We've got one on CSS, and we've also got one that's focused on single sourcing with Flare. So all of the information about these classes are on our website in terms of the curriculum and what we're going to cover. And as an attendee of this presentation, you get $100 off your registration. So drop a line to sales@madcapsoftware.com if you have any questions at all about joining one of these classes. And then the last thing I want to remind everybody, if anybody's interested in coming to our learning conference, we have two to choose from. We've got our conference in San Diego coming up in June. We have an amazing panel of educators for both of these conferences, and then of course Prague in September. A great panel of educators and amazing venues. These are tool-specific, tool-agnostic sessions. They're things that you can apply to your writing process the minute you return home to work. I'd encourage you to check out both sessions online, look at the schedule, see what we're covering, and see if that interests you. We have a couple of registration discounts on those through the end of April too. All right, so there's a couple of questions here. Oh, here's a great question. Can I import from Confluence files? So we don't have a direct Confluence import, but one thing you may want to look at is if Confluence can take your content and get it out to some standard format like HTML or XHTML, or if it can even export a chum file, those are files that we can bring into Flare. So I'll generally tell folks, if you can get the files into some kind of format that Flare can ingest, that's going to be your best bet. If you have a collection of HTML files that Confluence produces, well, you can import that entire directory of HTML files in Flare, and it'll convert them to Flare XML topics for you. And then you can rearrange them in whatever order that you want. So hopefully that helps there. Here's a great question. What accessibility-minded tools does MadCap offer? So, yeah, so accessibility is a big thing, right? We need to write for accessibility. And there are some things that Flare does. Let me see if I can get back to Flare. There are some things that you can do in Flare. I mean, the tool kind of takes you so far. When you're writing for accessibility in mind, you have to make sure you're also doing things, right, to make sure things are accessible. Table captions, you know, table headers and table footers, things that call out what's happening on the page are really important. So if we are working with a picture, for example, let's see, I think I can edit this picture. And where is it? The properties. Boy, they moved it on me. Well, I'll find it in just a minute. But basically, you can edit an image caption, for example, so that when the screen readers come to it, it's going to announce that there's a picture there. We also have some things in place with our MadCap Analyzer tool. We have an accessibility suggestion report, and it'll scan through and look at those areas where maybe you've missed some alt text for that image, or you know, the table caption is missing. Maybe suggest you put something in the particular table row or footer. So we have some things in place to kind of help safeguard. But there's nothing in Flare that says, you know, the minute you stop typing something, it says, nope, that's not accessible. So it does allow you to write for accessibility, and we do have some tools like that analyzer tool that you can analyze your project, and it'll show you suggestions on where you can perhaps make some tweaks to make it a little bit more accessible. So long answer to your short question, so hopefully that helps. Any other questions? I'll keep it open for just a minute. I wish I could hear everybody, but I'll rely on the questions panel. No? Well, like I said, this is being recorded. So as soon as we're done with this here, we're going to compile this little video. We'll send it over to you all so you can have it to refer to. I really hope this was helpful. I hope you were able to see some things that maybe you haven't seen in the past. If you want to download a trial version of our tools, they're available on our website. They're all free. You have full access to our tech support team while you're testing. You can call in and get any kind of help you would like, and we're happy to answer any questions about how things work. So I want to thank everybody for coming. I'm honored to have the opportunity to present to you all. And as I mentioned, we'll send this recording over to you when we're done. So thanks, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and hope to talk to you soon. Thank you so much.